So, today we're going to be looking at food production and consumption globally, and some of the issues affecting production and consumption in different parts of the world. As you know, and as we've discussed before, there are huge differences in the amount and the quality of food available to people across the world, depending on which part of the world they live in. So we have a situation where many developed countries, Western countries like the USA and Canada and Australia, have more food than their populations need. A lot more food, in fact. And at the same time, we also find that in the developing world, there are countries which don't have enough food to feed all of their population all of the time. So, examples of these would be parts of Asia and Africa, countries like Bangladesh, Sudan, and Ethiopia. And as a result, in these countries, there are situations in which the population suffers from hunger, from malnutrition, and in the worst cases in recent history, from starvation. So, in this lecture, I want to examine some of the reasons for this imbalance in food distribution and why it's such a serious issue for all of us. So, let's look first at the historical background. This graph compares world food production and world population growth in the 40 years between 1961 and 2000. In the 1960s, there was a lot of concern in the West about population growth. It was thought that the world population would increase faster than food production, and that therefore there would be a reduction in food supply globally. There would be less food, basically. But, in fact, as you can see, the opposite happened. Both food production and the world population increased, but the growth in food production was actually greater than population growth. And this was because of a number of factors. But mainly, it was because of better technology and because farming methods became more efficient than in the past. However, as the graph shows, this trend was not the same everywhere. There were regional variations. This data comes from the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. Here, we can see a breakdown of food production by continent over the same period, 1961 to 2000. You will notice that there are significant differences. So in Asia, for example, food production was higher than in Latin America. And in Latin America, it was similar to North America. But in Africa, food production actually went down over the same period, as you can see. So why was food production in Africa not as high as in other parts of the world? There are quite a number of complex reasons why Africa was not as productive as other countries during this period. But the main reasons were, firstly, a series of droughts where there was no rain for extended periods of time. And without water, of course, food production was badly affected. And the second reason, it must be said, was poor planning in terms of managing food supply and distribution. The consequence was that many African countries had to import food from other parts of the world. And in fact, even today, the amount of food that Africa imports is bigger than the amount it exports. But this is expensive, and in countries that did not have the money to import enough food, people went hungry. According to figures from the American Association for the Advancement of Science, we produce enough food for every person on the planet to consume an average of 2,790 calories a day. So, why are there still so many problems in terms of food supply? Why do we still see large parts of the world suffering from hunger and malnutrition? Well, one problem is distribution. You can see clearly from this table that the consumption of food per person is lower in some countries than in others. Much lower, in fact. In the USA, the average person consumes 3,830 calories per day. Some consume more, some consume less, but the average figure per person is 3,830 calories. That's more than enough. In Eritrea, it's only 1,530 calories per day. Less than half as much. And it should be noted that these figures include food that is wasted or thrown away. Okay, these are extremes, but they show clearly, I think, the extent of the imbalance. So, how do we solve the problem of this imbalance? An obvious answer is to distribute the excess food produced in richer countries to the poorer countries. But unfortunately, it's not as simple as that.